out. Now, we're now moving into a segment of the program where we do that intersection between tech, people, nature, and all the stuff we've been talking about now, to place. Where does it meet place? And you're about to hear, kicking off this session, a fabulous placemaker, a great urbanist who's been working around the country, now out of Boston, has always been, but continues to work out of Boston now with Stantec. When the four of us leave, would you please welcome David Dixon to the stage? Thank you. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. So I have to say, I first had the sheer privilege of meeting Mary when I had another great privilege, which was to lead the master plan effort after Hurricane Katrina for New Orleans, and Mary was one of the real heroes who came to New Orleans. And we both learned, I think, a lesson together. When people have asked me over the years, what should a community really do to prepare for a disaster like Sandy or Katrina? And frankly, my reaction has been, solve your diversity issues ahead of time. Because people who can't play together and talk together have a really hard time voting together and making decisions together. And I think that, to me, is the connection, most important connection to what we're about to talk about and what we've just talked about. So I always like to start with Jane Jacobs. I'm going to talk at MAS, the patron saint of us all. And it's very hard to find a photograph of Jane Jacobs frowning. They just aren't out there. This is the closest I could get. Because the Jane Jacobs paradox to me is she prophesized a world that we are now, that many of us have helped build, many of you have helped build. It's a wonderful world. It's a wonderful world, frankly, though, for a relatively small number of people, because what Jane Jacobs was not able, no one could have foreseen, is the tremendous growth of both of diversity and increased disparity around incomes, economic disparity. And the two together are making the concept of a civic commons, a place that transforms diversity in the community, all the more important and all the more challenging. And I want to talk about how we can get past the challenges and really achieve this hugely important. To me, this is on par with resilience. So about 2 years ago, Stantec invited me to come and form something called Stantec's Urban Places Group, and it is all about helping communities. We are all about helping communities manage the accelerating and dramatic demographic, diversity, and other challenges that communities face. How do we draw benefit from this? And one of the most important challenges that we deal with everywhere is, how do we make diversity work? How can diversity become not a challenge, but an opportunity? Clearly it is, but it's an opportunity that's elusive. So first of all, diversity is everywhere. If you look at growth, minorities, broadly defined, whether you're looking at suburbs or cities, it's 90 or 100% of our growth going forward. But it's really how we experience diversity, how it affects our lives, is really a function of who we are and where we are, how old we are, and all kinds of things. So if you're under 5, you view the world as a melting pot. If you're 65, just about everybody you know is the same race you are. If you live in, it's not just true of age, if you live in a city of over 500,000 people, you live in a place that's a majority of color, a place where diversity is omnipresent. If you live in a small town, you're living probably in a white community, not that different from what your parents lived in if they happened to live there. So diversity is very much a matter of who you are and where you are, and therefore the kinds of commons that we create, if it's really going to be civic, needs to be a function of those things too. I live in liberal Boston, practice all over the country, and people always have, first thing you have to do is say, we're not like Boston, we're not like Boston. Actually, everybody is like Boston in many ways. Boston is segregated by types of diversity that Jane Jacobs couldn't have even imagined, and she's still a saint. Language, age, income, education. We all find ways to live separately from others. We even come with different personalities, which is what makes things really complicated. At the heart of this, I think, is actually not ethnicity or race, culture. We have a value system now that is certainly challenging those the ways in which we discriminate, the ways in which we feel other than. But economic diversity is much tougher because it is not diversity, it's polarity, and it is absolutely baked into the society that we have built. Productivity has been increasing at a somewhat accelerating pace in this country. Up until we elected a certain president whose initials were RR, and this is a non-political statement. Incomes tracked productivity, but as we have done a number of things that we all know about, that era is over. For most of us, as our country grows more productive, more broadly affluent, more competitive, it has no difference, makes no difference for basic incomes of about 80% of us. For the other 20%, it's a benefit. So one of the challenges we have is to create places that, quite frankly, take from those who are getting richer to create places where we can all come together. And that's not quite a Robin Hood statement, but it's close. And I want to start with I'm going to focus on 3 opportunities to do this that we actually haven't had in my lifetime, but we have now. Because these changes, because of the wealth they're creating in cities, we have certain opportunities and ways to address these challenges. So we're just starting an amazing project in Charlestown, it's part of Boston, to redevelop 1,100 low-income units into 3,000 mixed-income units that will include 1,100 low-income units. Now, clearly, there are diversity challenges, and they need to be addressed in very nuanced and specific ways. There's a wonderful community here. It is absolutely isolated from anybody else who lives in Charlestown. The median income of the household income of these families, I happen to know, is about $11,000 a year. They literally live within 2 blocks of people whose household incomes are certainly in excess of $200,000 a year, and they don't know each other exists. They have no way of meeting, engaging, and if we're going to create a mixed income community, we also have to take a bifurcated Charlestown and make it a one Charlestown. So how do you do it? Well, first of all, you have to realize that these people are sharing a story. This is the Battle of Bunker Hill, we all know. That Charlestown was really probably the first city in America. It has a fascinating history. This site owns much of that history. So one of the most important things we can do is not only tell their story, which is very important, but they can join Charlestown. We're going to create a public space that helps Charlestown expand the story of the American Revolution. It happened to have been an African American who shot General Warren, the British general, something that I never knew actually until this project was about. There's a lot of interest in Charlestown in broadening the story, telling the full story. We can create a place that hosts the entire community. You don't just do that by creating a great place. We're working with a woman named Liz Ogbu, who some of you may know, on a similar project in Charlottesville. This is a place she created in Hunters Point, which is a great square. It belongs to the Hunters Point community, very low-income community. But she helped them create in such a way that they can do things like organize a circus with the surrounding much more affluent community together. So twice a year, they have a circus. Last time I was in San Francisco, I saw this circus advertised all over the place. Hunters Point now hosts San Francisco, and it does it around programming that addresses diversity. We're working on a project in Somerville, Massachusetts. It's outside of Boston, bringing 2 million square feet to an incredibly diverse area. This could be, and it very well still may be, all about gentrification unless we can use this investment to bake in diversity. Now, this place is diverse in all kinds of ways. One of the most important things we can do is create absolutely none of this. When we talk about retail, it has to be this, and change that. Places that speak to the kinds of diversity that happen in Union Square. We're also engaged, it's just fascinating to me, it's an effort to understand how can we enhance public realm related to mobility in Boston, very broad. And it's not a very big, it's funded by the Barr Foundation. So we're really trying to understand a framework. When we started, I thought this was all about great streetscape and fun stuff that brought people together. It's not. It's about empowering neighborhoods to tell their story and bring their communities together, bring Boston together. It's not so much what these places look like, it's the stories they tell and the meaning that they have for people. In fact, that's where their beauty lies. This is called the Up Truck in Upham's Corner. What's fascinating is it not only is a work of public art that is interesting. The earlier woman from Paris said, art has the privilege of not having to have any responsibility, but boy, when it takes responsibility, it can be powerful. So this artist is taking responsibility to tell the story of Upham's Corner, but in such a way that when it arrives someplace, it automatically becomes an event. So this is the front door to the story of Upham's Corner. And finally, we live in cities that are, no matter all the efforts that everything we need to do in our cities to be competitive, attract knowledge workers, attract investment, are also making our cities particularly economically segregated and undermine diversity. We need to accept that, but the wealth we're creating in cities can do things that help us counter it. This is my favorite park in the world, except what Mitch Silver's creating in New York, of course, a railroad park in New Orleans. This is a park specifically designed to bring, not New Orleans, Birmingham, Alabama, which clearly is Birmingham is the most race-conscious city, as opposed to New Orleans, where people they do now, but they didn't talk about race. In Birmingham, the first thing people ask you is, do you live in, if you're, let's say, an educated, affluent African-American, do you live in the educated African-American neighborhood, or where do you, people are just completely explicit, and it's really healthy. But they didn't have places that bring them together. Railroad Park is about that. So this is citywide potluck. This is, kids of all ages. A kid of a different age, and the women who really like watching him. So it does draw people together. This is one of the deadest places in Boston. And I won't say the architect is, but you know. But but it comes to life during the summer because that fountain, which was never intended for this purpose, is like a little United Nations. The kids all play, they don't know the difference, and their parents sit around and they start talking to each other. It's just astounding. Ways that we can introduce all of us to our own neighborhoods. And finally, Providence, Rhode Island created something called WaterFire. And it's very interesting. It wasn't the intent, but WaterFire brings every kind of person in Providence together because it's in the heart of the city, it's fun, and it is programmed to invite all the different kinds of people who like different kinds of music and different ways of experiencing public realm to come together. So I want to thank you very much. And I have to say, the funniest ad I've ever seen was on the subway this morning that says, "Since you don't drive, why cook?" Well, that is partly a comment, frankly, on the gentrification of New York. So on that note, thank you.